Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going on an absolutely thrilling ride. We are tracking the step-by-step journey of how humanity went from earthbound dreamers to actual spacefaring explorers. And honestly, we did it in the blink of an eye. We're talking about a massive leap, from literal wood and fabric gliders to sophisticated rockets piercing the cosmos. It's a journey that completely reshaped our understanding of the universe and, really, of ourselves.
Now, to kick things off, let's look at how science fiction planted the very first seeds for escaping Earth's gravity. Back in 1865, the French adventure writer Jules Verne wrote a book where he tried to imagine a realistic plan for space exploration using 19th century tech. Get this, in his story, members of a gun club decide to go to the moon by building a giant gun. I know, it sounds totally wild to us now, but this is exactly why science fiction matters. It literally influences how real-life scientists and engineers think about what the future can be.
But, before we could even attempt to reach space, we had to conquer our own atmosphere. And this definitely wasn't an overnight success. People dreamed about flying into the heavens for centuries. Starting way back around 220 CE in China, unmanned sky lanterns, which were essentially just mini hot air balloons, were used for military signaling and festivals. Fast forward a bit to the late 1700s, and we see human-carrying hot air balloons taking off in France. But, well, they were incredibly slow, totally at the mercy of the wind, and frankly not very safe. That finally brings us to December 17, 1903 at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. That's where Orville and Wilbur Wright finally achieved the very first powered, heavier-than-air flight.
Now here's the thing about the Wright brothers. They didn't just guess their way into the sky, they figured it out by relying on cold, hard physical data collected from a tiny homemade wind tunnel. They cobbled together wood, fabric, a petrol-powered engine, and everyday bicycle parts from their shop in Dayton, Ohio. But we absolutely have to highlight a crucial part of this formula, their sister, Catherine. She astutely managed the household and kept the business finances in check, which meant her brothers could actually focus on, making history.
So let's compare air travel and space travel for a second, because they are entirely different beasts. Flying a plane with fixed wings and a jet engine works perfectly for navigating the cold, oxygen-low strata of the Earth's atmosphere. But air is not space. To actually shatter the immense pull of Earth's gravity, you need a staggering amount of power. The solution? A really, really big chemical reaction. We're talking about a massive, highly controlled explosion.
We do, however, need to talk about the dark origins of rocket science to truly understand this history. Between Jules Verne's giant gun idea and World War II, the field of chemistry absolutely boomed, especially in pre-war Germany. This gave scientists access to unprecedented new materials. A physicist named Dr. Wernher von Braun used these materials to develop the V-2 rocket. This was the first long-range guided ballistic missile, and tragically, it was used with devastating effect against England. After the war, the United States utilized von Braun's undeniable engineering genius, essentially forgiving his past crimes, and eventually making him a director at NASA. It's a heavy truth. But rockets fundamentally changed warfare forever, replacing bombers with missiles capable of delivering nuclear weapons across the entire globe.
Section 1. The Cold War Space Race. Competition pushes humanity beyond the atmosphere. So, this terrifying ability to strike anywhere in the world quickly morphed into an incredibly intense competition. The United States and the Soviet Union were now racing to conquer the cosmos. And the Soviet Union took an early, terrifyingly impressive lead. On October 4th, 1957, they launched Sputnik, the very first satellite. This completely shocked the world. Then, in 1961, Yuri Gagarin made one full orbit of Earth. And in 1963, Valentina Tereshkova piloted Vostok 6, bringing womankind to space. These milestones were mind-blowing. They showed the world how rapidly the USSR had evolved from an empire of serfs into a scientific powerhouse that was breaking entirely new ground. Despite their fierce rivalry, it's actually really fascinating how both superpowers use such deeply poetic terms for their explorers. The Russians went with cosmonaut, which literally translates to space sailor. Meanwhile, the Americans chose astronaut, meaning star sailor. I just love that. Both nations clearly saw their people as brave navigators setting out across a vast, unknown ocean right above our heads.
So, what does this all mean for the US? Well, they had to respond to that massive Soviet lead. And in 1961, President John F. Kennedy threw down the gauntlet. He issued an audacious science fiction-scale challenge to land a man on the moon before the decade was out. Bam! It's like the spirit of Jules Verne striking again, inspiring this monumental national mobilization.
To actually pull off Kennedy's vision, NASA had to look at this impossibly complex problem and break it down into these monumental steps. First, they had to chart a course using computers that honestly are incredibly basic compared to the smartphone in your pocket today. They had to train pilots to survive as deep space star sailors. They needed to design a command module that could land on the moon and actually take off again. And finally, they had to build a massive launch vehicle to propel the whole shebang out of Earth's gravity. The Apollo program wasn't just a technical achievement, it was a massive big science managerial success, very much like the Manhattan Project.
And the powerhouse for this historic journey? That was the Saturn series of rockets, developed by Wernher von Braun's team. Remember that massive, controlled explosion we talked about earlier?
This is it. They mix liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen, and RP1, which is basically super explosive kerosene, to create a violent chemical reaction. This generated tremendous, earth-shaking downward force, effectively launching the massive vehicle up in the exact opposite direction.
Section 2. Landing on the Moon. The climactic achievement of Apollo 11.
All of this intense engineering, planning, and fierce geopolitical rivalry culminated in the summer of 1969. This is the timeline for Apollo 11, the absolute ultimate milestone. Launching on July 16th from Merritt Island, Florida, the Eagle lander miraculously touched down in the moon's Sea of Tranquility on July 20th. That's when Neil Armstrong became the very first human being to ever step onto another planetary body, right before Buzz Aldrin joined him. And get this, the crew safely returned to Earth just 4 days after landing. 4 days! I love this slide because it shows the incredibly human side of the mission. When you strip away all the geopolitical weight, these were young guys on the ultimate road trip. What did they do? They planted a flag, took what were essentially the first ever moon selfies, called President Nixon on the phone, and yeah, they grabbed some local souvenirs, stole some moon rocks. Absolute space hooligans in the best way possible.
Section 3. A collaborative cosmos, moving from competition to shared exploration.
After the dramatic climax of the Apollo missions, the whole narrative of space exploration started to shift. We moved away from the intense drive of winning cold wars and pivoted toward uncovering collective scientific truths. Now, big space science is wildly expensive, for sure, but the hidden yield of space exploration, it's literally all around us. Pushing for the stars gave us everyday technologies like solar cells, freeze drying, the digital cameras right in our phones, GPS, advanced weather prediction, and the modern global communications networks we rely on every single day. Not to mention, it gave us a profoundly deeper understanding of the age of the entire universe.
And that shift toward collaboration is perfectly captured by the International Space Station, or ISS, which is orbiting right over our heads today. Despite all the persisting political tensions down here on the ground, former Cold War rivals now literally float side by side. Since 1998, Americans, Russians, Japanese, Europeans, and Canadians have jointly run humanity's only outpost beyond the atmosphere. It's living proof that the shared quest for knowledge can actually unite us. But as we continue to pack Earth's orbit with amazing active technology, alongside tons of space junk, dead satellites, and discarded rocket parts, we run into a massive logistical and ethical question. Seriously, who actually owns space?
Well, in theory, space law clearly states that no single nation gets to own space. It's for everyone. But the reality of space real estate is a little different, especially when you look at geosynchronous orbits. These are those prime circular paths exactly 35,786 kilometers up, fixed perfectly above specific points on Earth. They are incredibly valuable, but space up there is highly limited. And right now, those spots are already heavily dominated by the US, Russia, China, and the EU. This creates a pretty unequal scientific landscape.
Despite these tough questions about who gets what, there is still so much hope. It's actually a really beautiful detail that the Apollo project was named after the Greek god of music, truth, and healing, not the god of war. This perfectly echoed President Kennedy's hope from back in 1962, that we wouldn't see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but rather with instruments of knowledge and understanding. So I want to leave you with this final thought. As we wrap up our explainer today, as humanity continues to push further into the vast universe, building on the awe-inspiring legacies of Kitty Hawk and Apollo 11, we have to ask ourselves a huge question. Will we just replicate the conflicts of Earth up there? Or is our greatest challenge actually figuring out how to share the stars? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep looking up.